The controversy surrounding Cyberpunk 2077 should be well known by now, and it's all true. To simply say that this game is buggy does not do it justice. I don't think this game is even finished. This is more like a beta or an early access release. And it's a shame that this downright inexcusable aspect is so prevalent that it manages to overshadow an otherwise interesting game. At the moment, I kind of have to imagine Cyberpunk without all the bugs in order to get an idea of how it was really meant to be played. And even then, I find the game to be very flawed, mainly in the balancing of gameplay elements as well as the ridiculous pacing between story and gameplay. So even if all the bugs weren't there, then I think this game is just average at best. Not bad, but not great either. But it is interesting and it's cool if you know what you're getting into. The story begins with the player choosing one of 3 backgrounds, giving you a unique prologue chapter as well as some dialogue options. Not a whole lot changes otherwise. I don't think missions branch out differently depending on the chosen background, and everyone's going to get pretty much the same story. It would have been nice to get more direction in this regard. I tried to play as pro-corporate as possible, but the majority of the game has the main character acting like a rebel without a cause, even if you choose the corpo-specific dialogue options.
You show me filthy streets as if no other world exists, as if nothing else is possible. What of the millions who work for Arasaka and receive stability, safety?
Shiba 11 slum rats? They're there. Scraping scraps out of scop tins. Corpse decided that too.
We cannot fix everything at once.
Forgetting I was at Arasaka? Saw how corps operate. Wasn't roses and rainbows. You know what? Nobody owns me. I'm free. You should try it.
And then, during the closing chapters, I do a sudden 180 as I try to get into the corporation's good graces again. It was disappointing. Aside from hiccups like that, the story is quite good. It follows the mercenary known as V, the player's character, and their rise to fame and fortune in the futuristic Night City. What starts off as a series of wet work jobs and rescue missions in order to make ends meet eventually culminates in a high-stakes heist gone wrong. I don't mean to spoil too much, but it's at this point when Keanu Reeves enters the picture, and he does a pretty good job as the player's foil.
I saw a corpse strip farmers of water, and eventually of land. Saw them transform Night City into a machine fueled by people's crushed spirits, broken dreams, and emptied pockets. Corps have long controlled our lives, taken lots, and now they're after our souls.
Come on, don't exaggerate.
V, I've declared war not because capitalism's a thorn in my side or out of nostalgia for an America gone by.
Cyberpunk 2077 has a fair bit of Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner to it, mainly having to do with philosophical conundrums such as the dangers of unchecked capitalism, overly relaxed freedoms leading to rampant degeneracy, and the separation between the body and the mind in a world where human beings are replacing so much of themselves, they might as well be considered real-life examples of the ship of Theseus. A lot of times, it's really interesting, even when it is clearly done for shock value. Like when V crucifies a death row inmate so that it can be filmed and made into a major motion picture that's advertised throughout the city. Quite literally a Hollywood production snuff film. Like, it's ridiculous, sure, but it helps emphasize this future that has pretty much lost all sense of moral boundaries. Just keep in mind, the amount of dialogue and cutscenes in this game is downright ludicrous. The voice acting is good, most of the time, and I think the writing is great. Every character has a good amount of depth to them, and no one is as simple as they first appear. In comparison to more dedicated movie games, Cyberpunk definitely blows them out of the water. But it's no exaggeration to say that this stuff can go on for a couple of hours straight without any meaningful gameplay. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Projekt Red was directly challenging Hideo Kojima with their own long-winded moments. But at the very least, Kojima's games tend to have some cinematography for the cutscenes. In Cyberpunk, everything's in first person, so you're just going to be looking at talking heads for 95% of the game. Again, it's all pretty good, but do expect the majority of the time to be dedicated to just listening to people talk. And while the voice acting is good, the animations are more hit or miss. It sucks too because these set piece moments are cool, but they look janky way too often. As for the gameplay, it's impossible to know where to even begin. I believe that, at its core, it plays very similarly to the later Elder Scrolls and Fallout games, but there's so much more to it. A focus on traversing a massive city with pedestrians, gangsters, and law enforcement, like in Grand Theft Auto. Stealth is encouraged and it feels similar to Deus Ex, and there's even a color-coded loot system in place just like Diablo and Borderlands. It very much feels like they attempted too much without either the experience or the know-how to pull it off. Just like in Bethesda's RPGs, the player is offered a handful of attributes to level up in, with each attribute having 2 or 3 specializations that offer their own bonuses. There's a pretty good amount of choice and customization to be had here, although the vast majority of it really boils down to upgrading either body or reflexes for direct combat, and then focusing on 2 more of the remaining 3 for additional stuff. Each attribute is also associated with some in-game requirements, although I found that only body, technical, and intelligence were the main ones necessary for accessing the vast majority of the game's secrets. Leveling up the cool attribute helps with some speech checks, and I think it's capable of bypassing a few situations of combat entirely. However, it's extremely rare for reflexes to ever show up at all. What's most egregious, however, is how useless half of these skills are. Things like reducing weapon recoil and better stamina usage are not that good. You're usually better off sticking with direct increases to numbers like bigger damage or faster reloading. The player can also perform actions throughout the game to help further their expertise, such as using up their stamina to upgrade athletics and hacking computers to upgrade breach protocol. Unfortunately, these aspects are extremely slow to improve, especially at the higher levels. Unless you're constantly hacking every random vending machine and television in sight, you're never gonna improve it very far. There's one time that I found a massive minefield, and you better believe that I spent the last 15 minutes disarming every single one to help improve my engineering skill. This isn't fun to do. Why is the game tweaked to such an extreme degree in this regard? It doesn't feel like progress, it actually feels like the game is trying to artificially block abilities for the player just by being annoying. Either it should be relatively easy to level up so the player isn't wasting so much of their time, or there should be a ton of sources that provide points so that it always feels like I'm constantly progressing. Cyberpunk doesn't do either of these. Seriously, the only realistic way to max out athletics is to get a turbo controller and let the game run overnight while you punch at the air. It's so stupid. The color-coded gear doesn't add a whole lot either, but I guess it usually doesn't in these kind of games. Weapons and armor of a higher rarity can be customized with more modifications for things like better critical hit chance, higher defense, and so on. But none of it is necessary, especially before you hit the max level of 50 since you're gonna be swapping guns around all the time anyway. This includes the armor as well, and if you want the best available at the time, it's probably gonna put you in a dress. Anyway, you're mostly better off with the weapons that have the highest base damage and leave it at that. It's pretty pointless and all it does is add unnecessary fluff to the game. The same goes for the crafting system. It can get you some of the strongest weapons in the game by far, but it won't matter until you hit level 50 since you'll stumble across stronger weapons for free as you progress through the game. Perhaps the worst part is that level 50 is overkill. I feel like I did quite a lot of optional content, and I still beat the game at only level 30 on the hardest difficulty. So, I don't know what to tell you. The whole rarity and crafting thing is pointless until you hit the maximum level, and hitting the maximum level is in itself also completely unnecessary. Aside from attributes and equipment, the player can visit a doctor to augment their body parts. Now here, there is a good amount of customization available, such as upgrading your RAM to be more effective at hacking and replacing your skeleton for increased defenses. But once again, most of this stuff is just a numbers increase. Some of the more significant upgrades are things like double jumping and a small grenade launcher installed in your arm. But the vast majority of the rest are pretty insignificant. Furthermore, some of the more premium ones are prohibitively expensive, which puts quite a damper on customization opportunities. Either way, like I already explained, none of it makes a big difference. You can still easily beat the game on the hardest difficulty even while you're underleveled, just as long as you have a basic idea of what you're doing. Not to mention that after you beat the game and then you enter the end game in order to go back and do additional content, you actually get some pretty major items and upgrades for free. So really, if you're looking for a more efficient path, you're better off beelining through the main story and getting your free goodies as soon as possible. At the very least, I could come close to looking past a lot of these aspects if the combat was up to par. Now, I'm not asking for miracles here, I get it. I'm not expecting first-person shooter action on the level of Titanfall 2 or Doom, and I understand that that style of combat isn't the focus of CyberPunk 2077. But what is on offer here isn't great. Aside from the typical pistols, rifles, and shotguns, there are three families of weaponry in the game. Power guns can ricochet off walls, tech weapons can charge up for a more powerful blast, and smart guns have homing bullets that automatically hit their target. It's too bad smart guns are so weak that they're practically useless. Makes sense, I suppose, for a weapon you don't really need to aim, but that's not helping its case. Your only real choices then are power and tech, so just go with whatever new gun you find is strongest at the time. A similar case goes for melee weapons. There are clubs, hammers, knives, swords, your bare fists, among other things. But they all control the same anyway. No unique animations or special attacks, just heavier weapons are slower to swing. That's it. Once again, just go with whatever weapon is doing the most damage for you at the time. For a world of the future, the lack of more varied weaponry is certainly a blemish. But what's worse is the utter lack of intelligence from your opponents. It's basically on the level of your typical cover shooter. They just like to hide, take pot shots, poke their head out, rinse and repeat. There's not much in the way of flanking, no attempt to advance their position. It's so basic. They'll try to flush you out with grenades, at least there's that. But for the slower pace of combat that this game has, I demand something more. There are a couple of additional enemy types like beefier dudes who rush you with melee weapons and hackers who can attack wirelessly even over long distances. But I wouldn't say that that's enough. To make matters worse, if you have a powerful tech weapon, then you can easily shoot everyone through walls and they don't even try a whole lot to defend themselves. That is, if they even notice that they're getting shot in the first place. It's so bad, it feels like cheating, but this is also one of the most consistent ways to level up engineering. This and rummaging through a freaking minefield, so I felt compelled to stick with it. Needless to say, it's stupid, boring, and it feels like a waste of time. But the boss fights are cool, right? Bravo, what a great game. Okay, in all seriousness, there are a ton of these mini-bosses who are just beefier normal enemies, nothing special there at all. But there are 2 unique bosses in the game. They have unique attacks, animations, patterns, and the arena you fight them in complements the pace of the battle. This is what I wanted to see more of. These boss fights are actually pretty good. Again though, I kind of have to imagine how the game is really intended, because there's a good chance that this guy will just get himself eternally stuck in midair and unable to defend himself. And that should segue nicely into the bugs, errors, glitches, and other oddities that plague this game. Sure, a lot of it is humorous, but that doesn't mean it's not terribly unprofessional. What's more harmful, however, are the moments that lead to unforeseeable, unintentional deaths that make no sense. And easily worst of all is the fact that for about every hour or 2 of gameplay, it's bound to crash. I swear to you, I've lost track of how often this happens. This is not an exaggeration. About every hour of normal gameplay, the game is just gonna crash on you. It is inexcusable and downright ludicrous. The game does run at a reasonable frame rate and textures load in just fine for the most part, at least when running this PlayStation 4 version on a PlayStation 5 console. But there are so many little things that it gets to the point of absurdity. Some of these issues, I'm not even sure if they should be considered bugs or just poor programming. Traffic can quickly disappear and reappear just outside of your vision, and the police wanted system, similar to Grand Theft Auto, it only seems to pretend to work. Police officers don't patrol the cities, but will instead magically teleport behind you as soon as you commit a crime. And this isn't just an occasional occurrence, it happens every single time. Your NPC partner who hangs out with you, Jackie, I don't even know how to explain it, I swear. His entire attack animation seems to be firing one of his guns one time and then reloading both guns. And this repeats infinitely. I'm not saying that this stuff is in the game permanently. I'm sure that Projekt Red will eventually patch a bunch of this stuff out, but for the game to have launched in this status cannot be overlooked. The first week of launch even had like 3 or 4 patches, and I didn't even notice a difference between any of them. The game crashed just as often, and the AI never saw any improvements. There's still a fair bit to talk about, but I know this has gone on for long enough. I haven't even spoken about how the game handles stealth, but I should touch on it briefly since it is actually pretty nice. Many objects in the environment can be hacked into wirelessly, allowing V to distract enemies, shut off cameras, and at the more advanced levels, convert the enemy's automated turrets. You can even set off an enemy's grenades wirelessly, or even force an enemy to commit suicide on the spot. The amount of possibilities for stealth and hacking are surprisingly pretty robust. But it seems to me like most of this stuff is just for flavor, and you have to be at an extremely high level in order to make use of the cooler stuff anyway. Realistically, I'm pretty sure that most players are going to be sticking with the basic actions for the vast majority of the game. I mean, again, this stuff is really cool, but its actual practicality certainly comes into question. Anyway, back to the stealth. The majority of buildings where action is supposed to take place in are usually balanced to allow a stealth approach the whole way through. And in this regard, it does feel a fair bit like Deus Ex, which I can appreciate. You can even get the jump on a mini-boss and deal a bunch of damage before starting the fight proper. It's crazy to see how much love went into this game in some areas, only to have it completely fall apart in others. This drastic inconsistency is what kills CyberPunk 2077 for me when I'm looking at this game objectively. The story and characters are interesting, and their themes are well explored. But for a game about choosing your own path, it only barely feels more advanced than something like Mass Effect from over a decade ago. For an RPG that appears to offer a ton of customization options, there isn't really a whole lot of creativity to be had here. That is, unless you decide to purposely gimp yourself by choosing not to use hacking, or trying to beat the game using only melee weapons or something like that. Then there's the lack of variety in weapons and the utterly useless artificial intelligence. It's also worth noting that the healing items have no weight to them, so I'm over here with over 300 potions at the end game. Granted, you can die so easily on the highest difficulty that careful play is more important than just popping potions, but it's still another layer on such an oddly balanced game. Even if CyberPunk was completely glitch-free, I would probably give it an average 5 out of 10 at best. Some cool presentation that was brought down by less than stellar gameplay. But then you pile up all the bugs and errors on top of that? Forget it, the game's just barely worth playing at that point. If you want a solid first-person shooter open world RPG, then this one should actually be alright, after about a year of patches to iron out all the kinks. To be honest, I actually didn't really hate my time with this game. I got myself pretty immersed in it, and I thought the story was really cool and enjoyable. It's just that, again, looking at it objectively, it doesn't really do a whole lot special, and then you've got all those bugs that really bring it down. Now that being said, if you want to play it safe and you're just not interested in a Skyrim clone, then you can safely ignore this game. It's likely not going to change your mind on the genre. Okay, now this is my last review for a while. I'm gonna take a short break, maybe get back on schedule in a couple of months. Until then, thanks for watching my review on CyberPunk 2077.